Well, Dan Evans, right now, the country has a lot of crises going on. A pandemic, we have division within the country, we have an economic crisis, we have racial reckoning. In your 95 years, have you ever seen the country have so many crises all at once?
Yes. I think we tend to look at the immediate um, circumstances we live in, and that expands the importance of them. But I remember vividly the attack on Pearl Harbor, the fright that was in the minds of every American, especially West Coast Americans, as to whether the Japanese were about to attack the West Coast of the United States. We've been through a major war and two more wars that were not won as we generally do winning wars, but Vietnam and Korea were both difficult times. We've had our difficult times before, but I think we tend to expand the importance of today's urgency because we're all living it.
Well, one of the things that happened was the ugly mob that attacked the US Capitol on January 6th. What were you feeling when you saw all of that?
Well, absolute dismay. I didn't feel horrified because I knew that ultimately there would be sufficient force come in to make sure that they couldn't accomplish what some of them apparently tried or thought they could accomplish. But it was really dismay to a great extent because I'd never seen anything like that before. There had been, minor attacks inside the Capitol in years past. One of them, at least, when I was in the Senate, but it was a very small group of dissidents of one kind or another. But this was far more than that. It was a massive crowd, many of them armed and prepared to do real damage. And what was most dismaying of all, they really were encouraged to participate by the President of the United States. And that really was the most dismaying thing I saw. That was unwarranted, unwise, and made the whole thing much more divisive than it should have been.
Donald Trump seems to be the figurehead of the Republican Party as it stands right now nationally. Do you think that's going to hold up? Do you think he'll continue to be the person at the top and that the Trump Republicans will continue to stick with him?
I don't think so. Nobody can tell what the future will bring, but I think that it depends a lot on what happens in Congress. If in fact the president is able to get the two bodies of Congress to work reasonably well together and the two parties to work reasonably well together, I think that Donald Trump will fade. And I think that there are plenty of other Republicans who deserve more respect, are advocating things that make a lot more sense in the long run than President Trump ever did. And frankly, I think that he will fade. My wife and I don't exactly agree. She thinks that he will still be around and be a rallying point for Republicans, but he will be for some. But I think that number will slowly recede as time goes on.
I know you were not a Trump supporter. Did you vote for Joe Biden?
I did. I did because I didn't 4 years earlier. I voted for the remaining Utah Republican, whose name I can't even remember now, but he was the only alternative to Donald Trump on the Republican side. Now there was no alternative, and I just could not vote. Didn't believe that Donald Trump should have been president. Certainly did not believe he should be reelected as president.
There seems to be this internal war going on in the Republican Party, not only nationally, but in this state. Now you have Kim Wyman, the Secretary of State and the only Republican at the top of state government in an elected office, who's even thinking about leaving the Republican Party.
Well, no, I don't think so. I got a message from her today, and she just said, I want to make it clear, I am not leaving the Republican Party. She said only in her original message that if certain things happened, she couldn't stomach being with that. But if those kinds of things happened, I probably wouldn't either, and neither would the vast majority of those who now vote Republican. But those things aren't going to happen, I think. And she is a marvelous example of a successful Republican in the West, the only Republican office holder statewide on the West Coast. And she is because she is smart and wise and able and runs her office as it should be run for everybody.
You know, the way things are right now, even Dan Evans wouldn't fit into this Republican Party.
Well, maybe not, but I would sure be right alongside Kim Wyman in terms of what to do. And, you know, I said in one of my inaugural addresses, I think it was the third one, that in talking about how you work with other party and with legislators, I said, I would rather cross the political aisle than cross the people. And I still think that's true. I'm not ready because I think that the fundamental beliefs and the fundamental strength of the Republican Party goes far beyond Trump, and he will slowly fade away and ultimately disappear. But I think the party itself can come back stronger, better, broader. You know, it wasn't very long ago that Ronald Reagan came forward and was highly successful because he constantly said, we've got to build a bigger tent for Republicans. And he was never one to divide the party. He was always one to expand the party, and he was enormously successful as a result.
So you're hopeful that the Republican Party might come back and maybe the nation might even find some way to.
Well, we were in deep trouble at the time of Nixon's resignation. I remember the newspaper editorials of the time saying that this is the death knell for the Republican Party and that they have no chance of ever being a national party again. 2 years later, we had a fabulously successful gubernatorial race nationally, elected, I think, 10 or 11 new Republican governors. And 4 years after Watergate and Nixon's resignation, we elected a Republican president. So I think the Republican Party, if it's smart, if it does what we did after that 1964 election, we'll do all right.
What's your hope, or how do you see our democracy surviving? Because I think right now, many people are wondering, can it survive with everything that seems to be pulling on it to pull it apart?
Well, we survived a civil war. We've survived a massive national depression. We've survived internal conflict that's more intense than anything we're facing now. The very first presidential election after George Washington, or after John Adams, when Thomas Jefferson defeated him for re-election, was the question of whether, what would happen, whether there would really be a turnover of power peacefully. And in fact, there was some real talk from Virginia and from some other states that there would be an armed insurrection if they didn't turn over power. And this was the first opportunity for people of the United States to turn power over from one political party to another one. And ultimately, common sense prevailed. It was done peacefully. And for all of our difficulties ever since, we have had a peaceful and responsible change of powers at every presidential election, including this last one.
I find it heartening to see that even with the violence that happened at the nation's capital, a lot of concern about maybe violence happening on Inauguration Day, it did not. And our democratic ideals still held up on that day. And so far, although they may be kind of frayed at the edges, are continuing.
Well, and we've had fraying at the edges before. And I think, frankly, if you carefully look at history, at sometimes even more difficult than the times we face today. One of our real problems, I believe, and have believed for some years now, is the rapid change in communications, the way we communicate. For a time there, especially right after World War II, newspapers were king, and then television came along, but there was always a division on when the news was on. It was news presented as objectively and without bias as people could do it. And then there were editorial pages and a growing number of editorials on television where all of the whatever prejudices and whatever opinions were, and that's the way it should be. What we've gotten to now is a communication system where we've given everybody a megaphone. With everybody with a megaphone, it's harder to objectively listen. What you say in that megaphone probably draws more listeners if what you're saying is more outrageous. And so we've sort of tilted toward the outrageous rather than the objective. And I don't know what it'll take, but I think that we will hopefully gradually come to a point where we recognize that the means of communications is one thing, that what you say is quite another, and it's much more important to try to get information and news across to people with the least bias possible, and then clearly identify what is opinion, and let people deserve both to hear opinions, but they should understand more clearly than I think we do now the difference between the two.
We're going through a racial reckoning in this country that I think is it's a generational thing, but also my feeling is that I wish it would have happened earlier because I'm older now. But as difficult as it is, I do feel a sense of hope because at least we're addressing some of the issues that have been part of this nation's ugly side, and that is the fact that racism has been a part of the nation's history.
But you know, it's eliminating racism isn't something that is easy to do, and it doesn't happen instantaneously. I remember vividly the growing intensity of conflict during my terms as governor. That was a pretty activist time, and it was activist on more than one subject. It was the anti-Vietnam War was rapidly growing in importance. We were seeing the beginnings of an activist environmental movement, and we were seeing sort of a second phase of the civil rights movement after Lyndon Johnson's remarkable work in that. There is now a second phase trying to translate that into more specific action.
Are you hopeful for the future?
Sure, I am. I am indeed. I think that I've read several stories recently about our fragile democracy. I don't think it's fragile at all. I think our democracy is very strong. We have difficulties we've had to face over 220 years, but we have faced more difficult ones than we face today. As I said, we faced a civil war where the country divided, and it took 4 years to end that civil war and to come back. And it took many more years than that to begin to erase the problems of racism. We've come a long way, but we've still got a long way to go. And I think if the difficulties of today and the protests of today can turn into an equally intense movement toward bringing people together and ending racism, maybe it'll all be worthwhile.
So 95, congratulations. That was one of the good things for you about 2020 is that you made it to 95.
Oh, I'm
shooting for 100.
Oh, absolutely. I say I'm kidding, of course, but I tell my colleagues, my counterparts, that I'm already starting to plan my 100th birthday, and I hope you're still around because you're invited, you know. But no, I feel healthy. Nancy and I are both blessed with longevity and independence still. So we'll see how things go. But there are too many interesting things to happen that haven't happened yet that I want to see. And I've told John Stanton on several occasions that I'm not going to go anywhere until the Seattle Mariners win a World Series. to which John said, "Yeah, you're looking for longevity that's far beyond any of us." I think even the Mariners will start to do better.
Well, you are hopeful, no doubt about it. And I'll tell you what, at 100, let's get together and do this again.
I would love to and fully intend to. So I know you'll be there. So
I hope so.
Oh, yeah, right.